Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music, and I'm back with, I guess we just would have to call it part two of what's the fourth element in music. We were talking about timbre. Timbre is an elusive quality that I guess most people call tone color. Today we're going to take a look at timbre as it shows up in synthesis, not acoustic instruments, but electronic or digital recreations of analog synthesizers. Let's take a look. You may never have used an actual analog synthesizer. What we're looking at here is Diva, which is a recreation of a physical hardware analog synth. And like all analog synthesis, it uses things called oscillators. VCO stands for voltage controlled oscillator. Well, oscillators are sort of measured in a couple of different ways. We talk about oscillators in a couple of different ways. And probably the most important way that we talk about it at first is wave shape. And over here, this lit up button here is showing me the sine wave. And a sine wave, and you can see it in the oscillator right here, is the purest waveform. It's a very simple sound, like a flute. Yesterday we looked at the flute sound, and here you can see it's very, very similar. I'm playing a D, and we have the fundamental. We have another couple of octaves above it. Sine waves are the purest form of oscillators, but we have other forms of oscillators as well, and each of them has their own color. I'm going to turn off the sine wave and turn on the triangle wave. It will be a brighter sound. Listen. As I open the filter, I get a little more sharpness, and just a tiny amount, right? My ears aren't as good as yours probably, but there you can see it appearing over there. It just adds a little bit more. Now, the most bright sound is the sawtooth wave, and the sawtooth wave has like all the overtones. Here we go. Huge difference, right? And you can see it represented here, and you can see the actual sort of oscilloscope rendition shows us that. Now, if I open this filter a little bit more, all the way up, it'll be even more like a sawtooth wave. Watch what happens to the oscilloscope as I close the filter. The filter is pulling away the upper partials, and as those upper partials disappear, it looks more and more like a triangle wave, and then at some point, almost like a sine wave. Filters work in conjunction with oscillator type to create timbre in synthesizers. And that's why sound design and synthesis is always leaning so heavily on what's the oscillator type. There's a square wave as well. So I'm going to close this and choose the square wave. And the square wave is a fascinating sound. Here's that D again. And if I open it up all the way, we'll get really sharp edges. They'll even distort a little bit. And if I close it, the edges become softer and softer. It starts to look like a triangle wave. It's because the overtones are being cut off. Now, come over here and look on the isotope insight window and notice how the harmonic series is different from the sawtooth wave. It's very clear that the first, third, fifth, and seventh overtones are present, and the even-numbered overtones less so. That really technically is the definition of a square wave. Square waves are kind of powerful that way. Well, square waves can be divided into a couple of different types. I'm going to turn on the square wave over here, and we'll listen again. And I'm going to play with the pulse width of it. And as I do, listen to what happens to the shape, the timbral shape of the sound. And you can see over in Insight how things change. We're sort of re-emphasizing different parts of the sound. The pulse width is the amount of time the cycle takes to happen, whether on or off. Let's put it down here. Okay, change In synthesis, pulse width can be modulated, and you've probably heard of pulse width modulation. That's what we're doing there. We're actually taking this sound here and going. It's a classic sound for woodwind emulations and for pad sounds, pulse width modulation. Listen, while we're here, let's just look at the noise source. I'm going to turn down the filter and play another F, and here we'll bring it in. And you can see that noise doesn't have any obvious peaks or valleys. There's no harmonic language to it at all. It's just a bunch of waveforms blanketing the spectrum absolutely equally. Noise, or in this case, kind of an oscillator imitating noise, like if we compared it to, say, a cymbal crash or something like that, noise has all the frequencies in it in the same way that the color white has all the colors in it. Now, since we have this all-frequency sound, let's take a look at what resonance does. Now, this particular filter has a resonance control. That's this thing right here. And what it'll do is it will emphasize the breakpoint of the filter, and we'll get a really interesting timbral effect. As I take the resonance up, there becomes a kind of an obvious bump at the breakpoint. You can see it right here, and you can hear a little whistling tone. Now, as I move the cutoff filter, it's like the wind is blowing through the window, right? The resonance bump gives me a pitch, and then as I move the cutoff frequency, I'm actually creating a kind of a little melody. Sound designers love working with that kind of thing, and it's a blast. If you're working with synthesis, you've got to take into account several elements, and the first one is definitely waveform. Is it a triangle wave, a sine wave? Do I need to use a square wave to emulate woodwinds? If I'm making strings, I'll choose sawtooth, or brass, I'll choose sawtooth and work with the filter. Frequently, when you're emulating a sound, you'll want to have a chaotic moment at the very beginning of the sound with a little more energy and perhaps some noise and a little more filter openness, and then close down for later on. We'll talk about how the filter envelopes can control sound perhaps in a later date. But for the time being, let's just notice how both filter cutoff, resonance, and wave shape, that whether it's a triangle, sawtooth, square, sine, or even noise, is really essentially what we're talking about when we talk about timbre in synthesis. It can be very, very satisfying to try to imitate acoustic sounds or create sounds on your own, just starting from scratch and building them up. Diva's a great synthesizer. I love working with it, but plenty of analog emulation synthesizers have exactly these same controls: wave shapes, filters, and then perhaps ADSR envelopes that allow us to control the overall shape of the event. Well, that's timbre in a synthesizer. I hope this has been useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ding the bell. You'll be notified when I do my videos, and I'll see you next time.